In autumn 2020, a new challenge arose through TikTok and caused an album, originally depicting dementia through music, to become mainstream. Many memes would come up, leaving either those who understood or the rest to be completely confused. This was me. Until my YouTube recommendations answered that question for me. An album with the same picture as those in the memes, called The Caretaker, everywhere at the end of time, stages 1 to 6. Hey autists, Fat Autistic Kid here. Usually, content like this would usually be full of shitposted memes just because I find them funny or to further my point. However, the very nature of this analysis will be discussing heavy topics such as dementia, so if you are mentally unfit, maybe come back later, but you have been warned. Many people have already discussed the in-depth detail of the context of the album, so I won't be getting into the exact details, though I will give some background so we can understand how this plays into the album. Everywhere at the End of Time is an album that explores dementia, an umbrella term used to describe memory loss and the difficulty in the ability to think. The most significant disease attributed to dementia is Alzheimer's disease. The album was created by James Layden Kirby, who goes under the alias as The Caretaker. Each of the stages was released in many months apart from each other, from Stage 1 being released on September 22nd, 2016, to Stage 6 being made on March 14th, 2019. Each cover of all stages was made by a friend of Kirby's called Ivan Seal, depicting each stage with an abstract painting, with a specific exception that will be discussed later. Kirby has also tapped into the idea of dementia through other albums such as An Empty Bliss Beyond This World in 2011. Before we describe the album, my analysis will be broken down into each of the separate stages, as generally talking about the album cannot do justice to describe what really makes it special. There are people who get uncomfortable at Stage 1 due to the context of what the entire album is supposed to be about, but in my opinion, I thoroughly enjoy listening to each song, even if it is clear that this is the beginning of the Caretaker's downfall into dementia. This is also shown by Kirby's description of Stage 1. Here we experience the first signs of memory loss. This stage is most like a beautiful daydream, the glory of old age and recollection, the last of the great days. Another aspect that conveys this is the album cover, so let's elaborate on that. The cover of Stage 1 is clearly identifiable and easy to describe, though people have different answers for what it depicts, either being a newspaper or toilet paper. No matter what it could be, it is an everyday object that anyone could pick out, which greatly portrays what this stage is supposed to convey. While being easy to listen to, there are forms of ambiguity that could represent the first signs of memory loss described in Kirby's Stage 1 description. However, no other song in this stage perfectly encapsulates this feeling than the first song. It's Just a Burning Memory is one of, if not the most iconic songs in the whole album, and for good reason. This song is very comprehensible, albeit a little mellow but very calming at the same time, with only very light vinyl crackling noises playing in the background. This perfectly conveys the feeling of Stage 1. While there is slightly noticeable memory loss, like the repetition of the song, the vinyl crackling noises, ever so slight reverberation, and a lower pitch shift, it is very clear what song is supposed to be playing, and typical to what someone would listen to in a normal album. It also conveys the foreboding nature of what's to come, which could be the reason why some people can get uncomfortable even at the first stage. The original sample used here is from a song by Al Bowley called Heartaches. It is a romantic song with an upbeat tone but mellow lyrics. The fact that Kirby was able to use part of the song's lyrics and twist it to fit into the context of dementia only adds on to why this song is very much praised and memorable. However, there are other songs which I personally believe do hold significance to how Stage 1 is able to excellently convey peacefulness with a sense of foreboding. The title of this song already describes well what the song is supposed to convey. It retains the peaceful aspect, but heavily focuses on foreboding and what comes next. This song is a simple piano melody that plays repeatedly, with noticeable crackling sounds in the background. The reverberation in this song is quite meaningful. It made me almost picture myself reflecting upon the past with this song playing. Overall, a very calming song which conveys the peaceful tone of stage 1, but presents a more foreboding nature, only added by the name, We Don't Have Many Days. Now, onto one of my other favourite songs. In Late Afternoon Drifting, the crackling noises in this part feel a lot more apparent than the other songs, which could perhaps be a representation of the first signs of memory loss. Apart from that, the feeling of an afternoon is perfectly portrayed here and feels a lot more peaceful than mellow. Just like We Don't Have Many Days, it is a very simple piano tune that plays, which feels more distant but overall still peaceful to listen to. You can already notice that some of these songs are very similar but have a few differences, which feel intentional. However, the next song is different but has a similar fanfare feeling to It's Just a Burning Memory. Another one of my favourite songs in stage 1, especially with the song name, which gives off a similar feeling to having nostalgia, especially for something in one's childhood, hence using childishly as an adjective in Childishly Fresh Eyes. The crackling noises are barely noticeable and the song is really easily heard while still feeling distant. It feels much less when compared to other songs. This is another song that excellently conveys the overall feeling of stage 1, mostly using nostalgia. Quiet Internal Rebellions can be seen as a song that clearly shows something is wrong, though it still retains the peaceful tone of stage 1. For instance, the name itself suggests there is a form of conflict, but it's still rather distant. In terms of how it is internal, it could somehow be the mind in conflict and nothing physical has changed yet. It forebodes what's to come with the feeling of stage 2, even when it retains the tone of stage 1. This is very much contrasted when compared to the final song of the stage. The way this stage ends is quite interesting. Another fanfare originally sampled from a song called Room with a View. The name follows the theme of romance, which is in line with some of the other songs like The Loves of My Entire Life and Into Each Other's Eyes. Many people, I myself included, have described this song as a feeling like a conclusion to a person's life, which is ironic as this is the final song in this first stage, and there's far more to come. Either way, this is a great listen, and fits well with the tone of stage 1, with the reverberation being a lot more apparent than the rest of the songs. Two sections split apart stage 1. Section A generally feels very calm, while Section B feels a lot more melancholic. Though each section does have exceptions to that rule. For example, in Section A, We Don't Have Many Days and Slightly Bewildered, and also Things That Are Beautiful and Transient, feel more mellow than calm. And in Section B, The Loves of My Entire Life and My Heart Won't Stop in Joy has a lot more of a calm and happy tone than the typical mellow tone of the section. This could represent good and bad days, where not every day will feel great or miserable, though a general pattern can be noticed within these sections. This is what makes stage 1 interesting, where some songs can feel different despite the general pattern of a section being different, which goes to show the lengths that Kirby took to present a realistic outlook at dementia. Overall, I think stage 1 is great at establishing the early signs of memory loss without them being really noticeable. The songs are very calming but also present a sense of foreboding that is much more noticeable in the next stage. There are many competing songs, but It's Just a Burning Memory might be my favourite. Without further ado, let's discuss stage 2. Stage 2 is when the listener starts to know something is off. The description reads as follows. The second stage is the self-realization and awareness that something is wrong, with a refusal to accept that. More effort is made to remember, so memories can be more long-form, with a little more deterioration in quality. The overall personal mood is generally lower than the first stage, and at a point before confusion starts setting in. People have theorized that this is the moment where the caretaker is diagnosed with dementia, which seems to be supported by the overlying theme of denial that permeates throughout the stage, with a more dreary tone as well as the song names like Denial Unraveling, conveying this sense of denial. While most songs are comprehensible and still enjoyable to listen to, the tonal shift conveys a sense of unease that cannot go underlooked. However, before we look into how these songs convey that, we must first describe the cover art. The cover depicts an abstract flower pot with flowers that are very much desaturated, mostly pointing downwards. If you look closely at the handles of the pot, it could be interpreted as two people, perhaps a man or woman dancing. It is very much comprehensible, just like Stage 1's cover, though a little more desaturated and more abstract appearance does set the tone for Stage 2. Speaking of which, let's discuss the first song. This song excellently transitions Stage 1's calm and enjoyable tone, such as My Heart Will Stop in Joy, to a more sad and dreary tone. The static in the background feels more like rain and no longer the crackling sounds like the previous stage. A simple melody plays through this, which doesn't have much reverberation unlike the background, which almost feels like droning noises to alleviate the dreary tone. The name, A Losing Battle is Raging, also brings a great transition into the stage and sets the tone for the majority of the names of each track, either having a sense of denial, sadness, despair, or all three. Overall, this song greatly portrays the sense of despair that is to come with a sense of denial. Now, how could such a great transition into the second stage be topped? Well, the next song brings a lot to the table. Let's discuss that. Hands down, this is my favourite song in Stage 2. All the emotions from the stage are masterfully conveyed in this one song, which goes to show the lengths to which Kirby was able to pick out each song and to mangle them into the concept of dementia. The reverberation perfectly encapsulates the sense of despair for the caretaker. The sense of denial is fantastically portrayed with the song's name, Misplaced in Time. As these songs were taken from early ballroom music, shifting to the present day can make these songs seem archaic, so seeing this can make the character want to go back to the older times, when the world made sense. The mere sadness of the song could be felt while listening to it, with a lower pitched version of Lullaby of the Leaves, making it a perfect song to convey this. Overall, the best song in this stage, and encapsulates all the feelings from Stage 2, and we're only getting started. But the rest of the songs aren't disappointments. They still slap for their own reasons, so let's get right into that, into the next song. This song name is another callback to the lyrics of Urnix, except a lot more aligned with the tone of despair, which fits with the song's more gloomy tone. To people who notice this is not the original Urnix by Al Bowley, but rather a pitch-shifted, more mellow cover version of the song by Sega Ellis, which could also add to the further distortion of each song, as it is a different cover and not the original. While the song does not contain much sense of denial, the sense of despair is excellently portrayed, and definitely gives off a depressing tone. A great addition to Stage 2. This is another song that conveys despair, literally in the title, Surrendering to Despair. While less noticeable, it retains the rain-like static present in A Losing Battle is Raging, reminding the listener that it will only get worse from here. The tone of the song is very depressing as well, and emphasizes the feeling of dread. even when the song still retains a sense of peace, albeit filled with despair. This is another great song that still conveys the feeling of despair and dread that infests this entire stage. This song is surprisingly more peaceful than most of the songs in Stage 2, but the static is very much apparent and feels more like rain-like static present in previous songs. The sadness of the song is very much portrayed as well as the sense of denial. Unlike the majority of the songs, the ending feels very much conclusive and not cut off in certain parts, which makes the next song a lot more interesting. Overall, a mellow but peaceful song. This is the last essence of Stage 1's calm and even fun tone. The song bears a striking contrast to the rest of Stage 2, with a tonal shift and even less distortion, with the static being very much so quiet. The fact that this is one of the most peaceful parts of the stage makes it all the more depressing once it ends, as the next two songs return back to Stage 2's depressing tone, and probably more so than ever. This song fantastically portrays denial, even in the song's name, Denial Unraveling. The melody feels more distorted and very distant, while slightly retaining peacefulness. The feeling of dread is very much apparent, as the static and reverberation are also noticeable. There's not too much to say about the song, but another great addition to Stage 2. The dreary tone seems to be the main focus of the song. The song name couldn't be more perfectly fitting for the ending of Stage 2, as the reverberation makes a great separation between the caretaker and the memories. And while there is no physical separation, the sense of mental isolation is about to begin. These final moments seem very mournful, and one of the only moments where peace can be retained. Overall, this is another fantastic song that forebodes what is about to happen. To conclude Stage 2, it greatly conveys to the listener that something is off about the caretaker's memories, as there is more distortion, as well as a generally more grim tone that underlies a sense of despair, denial, and the continual foreboding. My favourite song is Misplaced in Time. Now, let's discuss Stage 3. Stage 3's description is as follows. Here we are presented with some of the last coherent memories before confusion fully rolls in and the grey mists form and fade away. Finest moments have been remembered, the musical flow in places is more confused and tangled. As we progress, some singular memories become more disturbed, isolated, broken, and distant. These are the last embers of awareness before we enter the post-awareness stages. This stage is where the foreboding senses of Stage 1 and 2 begin to pay off. There is far more distortion present, sometimes to the point where songs begin to feel incomprehensible, something Stages 1 and 2 did not have to much extent. This is the moment where everything begins to feel off, with some songs barely playing, cutting to other songs to heavily distorted music. This is the moment where the caretaker realizes that nothing can be done to stop dementia, and feels like a slight acceptance of it, which can be seen through some of the song's happy tone, despite its heavy distortion. This can make the listener feel like they're going insane, which is how a lot of these songs are well portrayed. But the cover is also able to portray this. Let's talk about it. At first glance, I did not even understand what this artwork was supposed to be portraying, and some people have also felt the same way. However, after taking a closer look, this could be interpreted as the flower plot from Stage 2, except grown into an abomination of mangled plants, to the point where human figures can even be seen in them. It's difficult to even distinguish the flowers, though they can somewhat be visibly retained. This perfectly fits the sense of insanity present. While some things can be distinguished, it's very difficult to do so and could lead to madness. Speaking of which, let's discuss the first song. Let's reel it back a bit. The ending of Stage 2 is presented with a very mournful song, as it seems like everything is being taken away. Now, how do you transition into the next song? Answer: you don't. The sheer whiplash from the mournful ending to Stage 2 to the bombastic fanfare of Stage 3 is extremely effective and honestly terrifying. The fact that this is a very catchy song does not help at all, as I feel like I should be terrified, yet the conflicting tone of Stage 1 mangles with the distortion of Stage 3. The reverberation is far more noticeable, to the point where it affects listening to the song properly, as it seems like the memories are being majorly distorted. The fact that the static isn't very noticeable makes it all the more terrifying, as it somewhat fits the tone of Stage 1, but with worse distortion, which makes it almost uncomfortable. A quick side note, I always found the song name Back There Benjamin to be funny. I have no clue why, but now it's become a running gag on my Discord server, where I would sometimes put my status to "Shut the fuck up, Benjamin," to which everyone gets confused and wonders who I'm on about, to which the answer is nobody. Either way, this is a very effective opener to this stage, and only shows the beginning of the worsening distortion, which is abruptly ended with no conclusion, and just transitions to the next song. So let's talk about that. You might be wondering why I'm putting these 3 songs in this section, and that's because all of them use the motif of heartaches and follows a general theme. This is one of the last moments where you hear our body's version of heartaches, and just like the title, "And Heart Breaks," suggests, it's genuinely heartbreaking and terrifying at the same time. Having more reverberation and more distorted sounding melodies, it's very noticeable that this is one of the last moments where heartaches is comprehensible, which is very ironic considering that it quite literally uses the ending part of Our Body's Heartaches, which repeats a few more times before abruptly ending, as static could be heard. Overall, I think this is great portraying the terrifying aspects of Stage 3. To make matters worse, this is one of the first songs where the distortion quite literally affects the melody of the music, where the static is far more noticeable, and the song feels far quieter, which makes it feel like something that would play during Stage 4, but slightly more comprehensible. There is not much to say, except it feels like Kirby is presenting the reader of what happens when a memory is distorted, but there is still much more to get through. This entire song feels like constant droning noises, just like Stage 6, where heartaches could barely be heard at all. No static, just constant noise until it's abruptly ended. There is not much to be said, besides noting its very disturbing nature, which will be introduced in later stages. Without further ado, let's move back and go and talk about other songs that I like. Just like Back There Benjamin, this is another fanfare song, sampled from the exact same song from the first Stage 3 song, which is Goodnight My Beautiful. It's another catchy song with heavy reverberation and, just like Heartbreaks, uses the ending of the original sample. There's not much I could say besides things I've already discussed from the first song, but it's also another pretty good song that fits the themes of insanity. This song attempts to have a peaceful tone, but compile that onto the distorted melodies with droning static in the background makes it genuinely terrifying to listen to. This song feels like it comes straight out of a nightmare, with peaceful and uneasy elements juxtaposing each other to create an abomination of a song. Another great addition to Stage 3. Throughout the stage, the song names are a little less comprehensible, and more jumbled words which could definitely add to the factor of insanity towards the stage, and there is no exception with Drifting Time Misplaced. This is another peaceful song that samples from Lullaby of the Leaves, but Layton and Johnstone's cover of it, instead of the original George Olsen version. It feels a lot more drowned out compared to the rest of the songs. There are even parts that seem to phase out so much to the point where it becomes a droning like noise, until it fades right back in the end until the song ends. The reverberation here could not be more perfect, as not only does the memory feel distant, but the song itself is literally fading in and out, only emphasizing this separation. Just like Aching Cavern without lucidity, this feels like droning noises with hints of music slightly playing in the background, where the static feels a lot more like an ocean. There's not much to say about this, but it does convey a sense of confusion the song wants to portray, so let's move on to the final song of the stage. To conclude this stage, it greatly portrays the feeling of insanity, and how the last coherent memories are beginning to fade away, with some that are already heavily distorted nearly to beyond recognition. As many songs are either drowned out, has droning noises to fill the noise, or fragmented songs that echo their names. A very good stage that only showcases what is to come. Before we describe Stage 4, if you haven't listened to the full album yet, I highly recommend you stop watching this video and go listen to it, and only come back once you've finished it. Now, you don't have to, and you can carry on, but it's just recommended, that's all. Also, this part is where we will be discussing some heavy topics, so be prepared for that too. Now, let's talk about Stage 4. I exactly knew that once I heard a second from Stage 4, there is no going back from the comprehensive state like Stages 1 to 3. This stage is where the distortion overpowers the music, making it really hard to determine what sample is playing. Such distortions make it really hard to analyze separate sections, apart from highlights, though I will try my best to describe what each section made me feel, parts to pick out. The song names aren't forms of music anymore, but rather describing the progression of a dementia patient, which makes the stage all the more unnerving. Which fits, because it's also where memories seem to be incoherent. Stage 4 description is as follows. Post-awareness Stage 4 is where serenity and the ability to recall singular memories gives way to confusions and horror. It's the beginning of an eventual process where all memories begin to become more fluid, through entanglements, repetition, and rupture. Without further ado, let's talk about the cover. The cover is very clearly an abstract painting of a human face looking dreary to the side, as well as something that covers the rest of their head. Many interpret this as a woman by what covers their head, though it is not certain. Though without further ado, let's talk about the first section. Like I mentioned before, this is where the distortion begins to overpower the music to the point where it becomes basically incomprehensible. However, embers of music still remain, and sections can still be heard, but it's mostly fragmented, whilst other sample songs layer over each other, making it even more incomprehensible. One of the most noticeable pieces of music that can be heard, as well as presenting a perfect example of what I'm trying to portray, is Heartaches. Both the Al Bowley and Sega Ellis version play from different sides of your ears, though the Al Bowley version is far more distorted than the Sega Ellis version. Have a listen to this part. Also, you can hear the last few minutes of stage 4 playing in the background, yet it's not the main focus, and it's just thrown into the rest of the fragmented clips. Other distortions that occur is the use of reversed forms of samples, separate songs having different types of reverberation, and more noticeable static in their background. All of this compounded onto each other causes this entire stage to be very difficult to listen to, though it does get worse from here. There is a section over halfway where more static seems to interrupt a peaceful sounding song as it pans from left to right before it stops playing. Near the end, there's even another version of Urnix by Guy Lombardo that plays as well, which could also represent how much more distorted the specific memory has gotten. A lot of what I mentioned about the distortion still applies here, and makes the songs even harder to pick out, though I won't mention everything again, as it would basically just be me regurgitating the same information over and over again. Though this section contains an infamous part that everyone loves to discuss, so let's paint the picture. Suddenly, the song cuts to these noises that begin to feel comprehensible again, but something seems clearly off. They don't sound exactly like notes, especially when you hear heavily distorted clashing noises. It seems like it's going to build up to something, then everything starts to come together. Then, everything begins to grow silent before the distortions return again for the rest of the song, a lot heavier than ever before. This is the most iconic part of Stage 4, and the community titles this as Hell Sirens, and for very good reason, though I personally don't get the hell part, but that's just me. There are two ways this can be majorly interpreted, either one fitting very well into the situation, and Kirby could perhaps be referencing the two as well. The first interpretation is one that most people draw to conclusion, and very understandable why. This section sounds like sirens going off, and very emblematic of sirens heard from either World War I or World War II. This could perhaps be referencing post-traumatic stress disorder, and implies that the Caretaker might have been drafted into war before. This only makes it worse as the memory seems to be distorted by dementia as well. The second interpretation is that the Caretaker finally regains their awareness as each of their memories is being destroyed in the process, one by one, and knowing there's no going back, begins to have a meltdown, symbolic of the siren sections. Both of these interpretations are terrifying on their own rights, and picturing both of them simultaneously makes it even worse. Apart from that section, the rest of the song is purely distortion until the next section, so let's talk about that now. Hearing this out of context might sound very bad, but after being submerged into two sections that are hard to listen to, this is very peaceful in comparison. By all means, this isn't exactly like stages 1 to 3, but a break from the constant distortion is more than enough. There isn't much else to say about this, so let's discuss the next segment. Just like the majority of this stage, it continues with the distortion, but the only notable aspect of this is the last few minutes of the stage. It is probably the most peaceful as it gets. The reverberation and static are very much present and seems like peace. Something like stages 1 to 3, as it plays a simple piano note that drones for a while. It could be interpreted as a final moment of peace, perhaps with a family before it gets even worse, which it will do very soon. However, this is what concludes stage 4, and I think it's a fantastic one. This stage is the beginning of the horrific aspects of dementia and the grim reality of what it can do. There have been people who already felt terrified of stage 4, so it's understandable why Hell Sound is probably the most iconic part of the stage. However, there are another 2 stages left, and the next one is going to be quite hard to explain. Stage 4's ending is clearly peaceful. It finally feels comprehensible again. So, how does Stage 5 introduce itself? Well... This is where the most terrifying aspects of dementia roll in, with the worst distortions out of all the stages combined. However, one of these distortions are very much present, and it's this harsh static sound that interrupts any aspect that sounds like music. Speaking of which, can you even call this music anymore? The fragmentations of these songs are worse, with more reverse sections, as well as voices that can be heard, which only compile onto the terror of the stage. The description is as follows. Post-awareness stage 5, confusions and horror. More extreme entanglements, repetitions, and rupture can give way to calmer moments. The unfamiliar may sound and feel familiar. Time is often spent only in the moments leading to isolation. Let's talk about this stage. The cover here is probably the most incomprehensible covers out of all the stages, though it can be noticed that it does look like a woman wearing a fancy dress walking down some abstract stairs. However, it's understandable how it can be nearly impossible to even understand, and this cover perfectly conveys the confusion of stage 5, as well as its terror. I can't emphasize how horrifying this sounds. From layered distorted music and voices to harsh static interrupting the songs, it genuinely made me want to stop, but I knew that I couldn't, and that I had to focus on what's going on. That being complete incomprehension. The fact you can hear birds chirping in this part is a sheer juxtaposition with the terror of dementia and its effects on the Caretaker right now. The song name itself quite literally sounds like something a doctor would describe towards a dementia patient, as the Caretakers become nothing but fragmented pieces left from the destruction of it. However, then you begin to hear some music, which begins to play in the background, but immediately stops as the distortion continues. But shortly after, this happens. This moment is just tragic. I cannot stress enough how much emotion this packs in within just half a minute of comprehensible music before being shifted right back into chaotic distortions. This is sampled from a song called Was It a Dream by Dick Powell, and it could not feel more fitting for this section. A love song transformed into a terrifying and ironic outlook on dementia makes this all the more dreadful when listening to this section, especially when you consider the lyrics that would be playing at this part. Let me demonstrate. The irony that something like this would be a bad dream is a gross understatement, as the chaos is quite literally the reality. This is evidence for the concept stated by many comments that describe the people who suffer from dementia are still themselves, but trapped in their own mind, very confused and terrified. The mere concept of this is already terrifying on its own, and applying it here makes total sense, as a person with dementia still knows who they are, but cannot communicate that through anyone else. Either it's silence, or a complete jumble of language that's nearly impossible to comprehend. This could also be a continuation of the second interpretation of Hell Sirens, where unlike Stage 4, where the Caretaker has a complete meltdown over the realization that everything is being destroyed in his mind, one by one, Stage 5 presents the peace that a short moment can present. Rather than feeling pessimistic, it feels like a final moment of calm before pure dread returns as the constant distortions reintroduce themselves. While there are other moments of clarity, as people call it, this is probably one of the most important ones of them all, and shows how much the Caretaker has descended into dementia. Let me play a few of these moments. During this moment, you can even hear Hell Sirens play, but the best thing about this reintroduction is that it's not only that it's more distorted than ever, but the fact that it seems insignificant in comparison to the new distortions that play alongside it, just being a simple addition to the layers of confusion, just like a lot of the songs that play, and shows that even traumatic events can follow much further into someone with dementia. Apart from that, there's not much else to discuss here. What a fantastic section. Everything I've discussed about K1 applies here too. It's just more of these constant distortions throughout, and it's just as terrifying as before. So let's move on to the next section, which there is more to discuss. This section is very weird and contrasts quite harshly with the entire stage. Mostly, it is actually more peaceful than the rest of the other sections, but it also contains parts where songs attempt to play before the harsh static interrupts them. One of the interesting parts of this section is the name, synapse retrogenesis. It is a theory of dementia where the process when neurons work are in reverse order, from adult to infancy, which is interesting to think about when you consider the fact that every memory seems to be fading away into these last two sections. Speaking of which, let's discuss the last part. This section is where distortions are at its peak. All memories are simultaneously being erased constantly throughout this song. When we get to the near end of the song, specifically an hour and 20 minutes if you're watching stage 5 separately, everything becomes peaceful again, and feels like the droning noise is present in synapse retrogenesis. However, hearing this is straight up disturbing, as we only have peace because there is barely any cognitive function anymore from the Caretaker. doesn't help by the fact that when everything becomes purely droning noises, there's a snippet of a song that plays before this occurs. Again, another tragic moment, which goes to show how much the Caretaker has fallen into the depths of dementia. Personally, I find this stage to be the hardest to sit through, and the most terrifying out of all the stages. Hearing the constant harsh static attack any forms of songs that attempt to play is simply horrific and heartbreaking. Was It a Dream is purely tragic, and the ending is a fantastic portrayal of everything being lost as a result of dementia. A great transition into the last stage of this album. It may seem controversial to say this, but here it goes. Stage 6 is actually more peaceful than stages 4 and 5, but how peace is achieved is what makes this stage the most disturbing of them all. Most of these sections are mostly ocean-like droning noises with static in the background. Very little essence of music can be heard now and then, but it fades away quickly until the listener is reintroduced into these ocean-like drones. The song names too are quite similar to Stage 2's Feeling of Despair, but far worse. The description is as follows. Post-awareness Stage 6 is without description. The feeling of nothingness is excellently conveyed here, so let's discuss it. The Stage 6 cover contrasts heavily with the rest of the stages, simply as it's not a painting, but rather a photograph of a blank canvas with blue lines. In ways, a blank canvas can be seen as a way to represent infinite creativity that someone could have with how they can interpret a drawing inside it, but here, it represents the opposite. Total nothingness permeates through this entire album, and nothing could be more fitting than this photograph. A commenter described the blue lines or tape as this. Blue tape is used in home inspections to mark areas that are incomplete or need repair. Now, let's discuss the first section. The name itself, a confusion so thick you forget forgetting, is already full of despair, where the album makes it clear that dementia is not a joke, and the Caretaker is descended to the point of no return. The entire section makes the listener consider how far this descent is, through the ocean-like static and droning noises that encompass it. The reverberation of this too feels representative of the destruction that has been caused. The tone in general is empty and mournful for what has happened. Not much else can be said here. Let's discuss the next section. The general tone of this stage is perfectly encapsulated within the name, A Brutal Bliss Beyond This Empty Defeat. It is a lot more dreadful than the rest of the sections. It no longer sounds like the ocean-like static present in the first song, but rather a more harsh static drone that sounds like the last essence of someone's mind being crushed until nothing remains. And very small snippets of music feels very dreary until they stop playing altogether. Overall, this section is one of the most disturbing parts of this album, as it makes the listener feel like dread has overpowered them. Now, let's move on to the next section. This section combines the peace of the first section and the brutal tone of the second section, and the end result is this section. The name itself also captures this very well. The conflicting feelings of finally knowing that the painful distortions of stage 4 and 5 are over, but realizing that every single form of memory or ways of accessing them are destroyed, brings a mixture of relief and sadness. There's a specific section that plays a few notes which seem normal until no essence of it can be heard again. There are more parts which can clearly be heard, yet it is nearly impossible to figure out what is playing. Overall, the conflicting feelings of this section perfectly represent the pure tragedy of the Caretaker's downfall, where barely any more pain can be inflicted on them, but to feel completely nothing is also what makes this section disturbing. That is all I have to say about this part, but I want to get my last thoughts of the stage out of the way first, before we get into the final section. So let's do that. This stage perfectly resembles the feelings of nothingness and the complete destruction and decay as a result of dementia. While more peaceful than stage 4 and 5, it is by far the most disturbing out of all the stages. Which leads us to the final section. The song name is perfect for the ending of this entire album, and forebodes that the Caretaker will die. Most of this section returns the peace, and for a moment it begins to build up to something with these new droning noises, which sound almost ethereal. For a moment, it feels like death is on the horizon, until suddenly these droning notes stop. For a moment, it sounds like the album is about to end, but suddenly, a few noises can be heard before the very last song plays. This section might be one of the most iconic parts of this entire album. The song is very much distorted, but feels like music for once, where voices are barely comprehensible, but it feels rewarding to hear when the album has shoved many hours of nothing but distortion. Many people have described this as a theory called terminal lucidity, where the patient has a final moment of remembrance until they finally pass away, and this couldn't be more beautifully portrayed, as this moment feels like an ascension away from this world, shown by the name itself. Then, as the song ends, the music halts to a stop, as there is a minute of silence, representative of the Caretaker's death, as the album is presented at its conclusion. Everywhere at the End of Time is a scary yet realistic and beautiful portrayal of dementia. It has had a significant impact on those who've watched the entire album and has brought awareness to the idea of dementia. The fact that this can happen to anyone is quite simply a terrifying thought, and the idea that one could become completely void to their identity due to a disease is also very much terrifying. But it is getting easier for patients who suffer through dementia, as well as ways of taking care of them. This is no doubt an album people will never forget, and even brought some musicians into the spotlight again, such as Alboli. I will never forget an album like this anytime soon, and will be one of my favourite pieces of art, up there with other projects I dedicate my time to, such as Undertale. And hey, that might be a video I will be working soon. Thank you for watching my analysis of this album, and I will see you all again soon.